Dino Crisis is the most challenging and brutal game I've played in a hot minute. It does not hold your hand, and it punishes you at every teachable opportunity to ensure you're paying attention. This has to be one of the most humbling reminders of how soft we've become as gamers. It is marvelously unapologetic at times, and I absolutely adore it for that reason. I've also developed a brand new respect for those of you who power through this game without guides, walkthroughs, and modern crutches and safety nets. Let's safe state that. I salute you all, and with that, let's get into how Dino Crisis beat me up and took my lunch money. Alright, for those of you who aren't subject, I would really appreciate if you do that. Going forward, this will become an ongoing series I'm dubbing Cleaning Up My Catalog. In it, I will go back to all the iconic games I missed in the past 30 years or so. So if that at all interests you, you know what to do. And with that, let's get into the video. So, Dino Crisis will be the first game in this new series, and what a start it is. This game has been on my radar for the longest time, and I'm gonna be real vulnerable for a second here and tell you, I was intimidated to play it. But there was something I feared even more, and that was, what if I didn't like it? You see, I love horror games, with Resident Evil being my favorite series, and I love Godzilla, and by extension I love dinosaurs. What is Godzilla if not a mutant dinosaur, right? And Dino Crisis seemed to be the fusion of my two favorite things. Over the years, I've romanticized this idea of Resident Evil cross dinosaurs, and I imagined it would be the greatest concept for a game. It's weird to say out loud, but I think my mind would have rested easier if I never played it and simply held that idea of the perfect game in my head versus risking playing it and realizing I didn't enjoy it. Kinda like how Valve thinks it's better to not have Half-Life 3 rather than risk it failing to live up to the hype. Which reminds me, Half-Life 2 is high up on my list of games I need to get around to playing. My point is, I would have been devastated if I hated the game. Thankfully, coming out on the other end of it, I can say I enjoyed almost every minute of it, warts and all. But enough preamble, let's get into the meat and potatoes. Starting with the biggest roadblock, for me at least, and that was the dreaded tank controls. This was probably the most intimidating aspect of the game, as I have not completed a tank control game prior to Dino Crisis, and I can now say confidently that I'm somewhat competent with the outdated control scheme. But it didn't come naturally. Being the slow learner that I am, the first few hours of the game was extra brutal, especially navigating tight corridors with sharp turns. Heaven forbid there be any dinos waiting in ambush, and it was almost certainly game over. I won't lie to you folks, that first raptor encounter had me shaking in my boots for fear of the challenge that awaits me further into the experience. If I couldn't handle tank controls against one measly raptor, how would I handle the dreaded Tyrannosaurus? But eventually, with a few hours practice, it became significantly easier to dodge velociraptors in cramped corridors. Now I was simply battling raptors instead of the archaic control scheme. And then came the next hurdle, actually surviving. You see, the way this game was designed is a reminder of how devs in the 90s gave zero fucks about your disposable time. Nowadays, there's a fear among studios that if a game presents too much resistance, you risk scaring off a potential player. As a result, most modern games include a plethora of gameplay options that help smoothen out the rougher edges of the game that might present even the mildest annoyance. Something as simple as an autosave can be found in almost any single player game now. These can save you a few minutes at a time from redoing certain sections, potentially saving you hours of unnecessary runbacks of lost progress. This is a feature that feels necessary in an era where games are so abundant and time is so limited. In a world where thousands of new games are introduced to the pool every month, it's becoming harder and harder to convince people with free time on their hands to play your specific game. Not to mention competing with the likes of mobile screen time in the form of things like YouTube and TikTok, but that's a whole other argument. Point is, time feels more precious and limited than ever, and if a game is not going to respect that time, we end up moving on to something else that's less wasteful with it. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, as kids we had more time on our hands, more time for the few games we had. Many of us didn't have the luxury of choice, and maybe we only had a handful to choose from. Sometimes we played one game over and over, and if you didn't have a memory card, it meant starting from the beginning of the game every time you booted it up. Yeah. Good luck explaining to your parents how you needed another expensive accessory on top of the expensive console and game they just bought you. I digress. As kids and adults in those times, we didn't have all these easily available distractions that we have today, all vying for our time and attention, and sometimes coming in at a zero cost of entry. We've essentially removed boredom from existence. Think about it, when was the last time you were truly bored? It doesn't happen anymore. Media today is designed to hold your attention as long as possible. And getting back to Dino Crisis, it wasn't designed with player retention in mind. Instead, it placed the challenge on the player, with the use of reverse psychology, to spur them on if they wanted to see the ending. Remember, this wasn't a time where you could simply search Dino Crisis ending into YouTube to see how it plays out. The impetus was placed on you and whether you had the cojones and willpower to eat shit and go back for more. To be clear, there is an easy mode at the start, but who likes it easy, am I right? I'm kidding, of course. You do you, boo. Honestly, if there was a hard mode, I doubt I would have had the psychological fortitude to reach the end credits in one piece. So, what exactly makes this game a challenge? Well, for starters, when's the last time you saw a game over screen that forces you to restart the whole game after 5 deaths like a coin-guzzling arcade machine? That, by the way, is how it plays. You get 5 lives before the game is over for good, and you have to start a fresh playthrough. To be clear, you can save the game at any point from any of the save rooms, but who's got time to constantly run to a safe room every time they push the needle forward slightly? Plus, if you have a resuscitation kit on you, it'll use that instead of a life. So realistically, you're allowed to die about 10 times before the game is over. Unless you actually load all the saves and replay the whole section again, but do it better this time. Which once again brings us to the how much time you got on your hands argument. Yeah, this was not something I was prepared to do, so I became well acquainted with the save state and reload keys. I'ma keep it real with you, I think I died about 20 times to the T-Rex alone, so there was no way I was gonna beat this game on my first attempt. To be fair, in most of these cases, I allowed myself to mess around because I know I had a safe cushion to fall back on. I was trying to save as many bullets as I could because they were so scarce at the start. And I was treating this scene like a scripted moment from a modern game where it's actually designed to look intimidating, but it's actually harmless and easily possible by just waiting in the right spot. Usually games these days avoid including sequences where a player could lock themselves into a potentially unbeatable situation. Not Dino Crisis though. If you decide to back up, this boy will eat you. If you came here without bullets, be prepared for a toothy assault. It's kinda like each time you encounter the T-Rex, it's like the game is skill checking you in a way that's not overtly obvious. You see, while these sections are not particularly hard, provided you understand what is required of you, the game seems to be checking your progress as a player in terms of how well stocked you are and how well you've managed your resources. If you weren't stocked up at any time you ran into the T-Rex, you wouldn't stand a chance going forward. Every T-Rex encounter necessitated a liberal use of ammunition to progress, and if you came here understocked, it would have meant a premature end for your playthrough. If I had played this game without save states backing me up, I for sure would have failed some of these roadblocks. Aside from the mighty T-Rex, there's also a handful of smaller but no less deadly dinosaurs that's eager to tear you apart. Starting with the Compsognathus. These little guys pose nearly no challenge at all. You only find them in about 2 or 3 locations throughout the game, and I felt they were easily avoidable provided you stayed on the move. Next, with the Pteranodon. Known commonly as flying assholes with wings, these guys presented way more of a challenge. They would swoop down in a flash to deal quick damage. Sometimes I couldn't even raise my gun in time to get a shot off. I felt I had to predict the swoop and aim prematurely in order to hit them. Also, if you stood idly for too long, they would sometimes swoop down and attempt to carry you away or drop you from a height. Eventually, the best thing I found was to avoid them altogether. Simply running in a serpentine movement meant I could just narrowly dodge the dives of these dinosaurs and also save some precious ammunition in the process. Next up, the iconic Velociraptors. I mentioned these guys briefly at the start, and what I failed to mention is just how much I dreaded every encounter with these creatures. They are as fast as you think they are. You cannot outrun them, but you can attempt to bait them into attack and sidestep them. Sometimes you might even catch them napping on the job, granting you a few precious seconds extra to find an exit before they wake up. But if you decide to stand your ground, be prepared for the worst, because these guys do not mess around. Beyond simply biting you, they will often try to grapple your arm or straight up jump you, forcing you to fight them off or suffer major bleeding damage, which slowly drains your health until you use a specific item. By the way, the game never tells you that you need to wiggle the analog stick to break the grapple. So for most of the game, I was just mashing all the buttons until I eventually figured it out. What's even worse is sometimes they will straight up knock your weapon out your hand during a frenzied attack. What I loved about these dinos is that they presented the sort of intimidating presence that induces a level of dread that I often claim is missing from modern horror games. Every combat encounter was as butt-clenching as the next. Death comes swiftly and makes me really appreciate how unforgiving these raptors were designed to be, and how tense it makes the overall experience. Next up, the Therizinosaurus. What can I say about these monstrosities? Let me put it this way. After meeting these guys, they made me relieved to be greeted with raptors when I enter a room. They are tanky, hit like a ton of bricks, and can potentially one-shot you. Not to mention, they are faster than you, so avoid running in a straight line. And they like to travel in pairs. Needless to say, I didn't spare any firepower when dealing with these powerhouses, often reserving my poison darts which kill dinos in a single hit specifically for these brutes. Beyond screwing around with the T-Rex, these boys were the main source of my many deaths throughout the playthrough. And lastly, the blue raptors, which, funny enough, as I'm writing this, I'm learning that they were supposedly stronger than the aforementioned Therizinosaurus, which came as a bit of a shock considering I honestly didn't have much issue with them. But to be fair, they came at a later stage of the game where I was better prepared to deal with them. Plus, at that point, I learned how to time my shots so that it was possible to keep them at a safe-ish distance. The best part about all this is that the larger dinos, that being the Velociraptor variants and the Therizinosaurus, would sometimes follow you through certain doors and appear at the most inopportune moments. Whenever it happens, it feels kind of game-breaking, simply because we don't really see that kind of thing in games. Usually when we run away, there's an understanding that when you load into the next area, everything you left in the previous area remains as it is. But here comes a raptor from the other room to ensure you don't get a second to breathe and punishes you for running away like a coward. I absolutely adore this feature for how it threw me for a loop when I thought I was being crafty. Let's talk a bit about the inventory management. So if you've ever played one of the earlier Resident Evil titles, you'll know that the resource management was a huge contributor to the difficulty of the game, due to its very limited size. It meant that you needed to be mindful of what you carry and you never had the opportunity to carry everything you wanted. This meant many runbacks to the item box to deposit and retrieve items as required. Dino Crisis opts for a better method of space management in my opinion. Here you get to carry all your weapons without them taking any space in your inventory. You only have to worry about ammo and healables taking up slots, as key items take up no space at all. Here's the kicker though, while you can find resources scattered throughout the world, they're pretty scarce. Your main source of top-ups come from these emergency boxes on the wall. These can be found numerous times throughout the game, and can be opened with plugs. And here's what screwed me over for the first few hours of the game. These plugs can be found on bodies, in boxes, and random shelves and lockers, and even in lab coats. This is something I completely overlooked. You see, over the years, I've been conditioned to see backgrounds just as filler to give the scene personality, often clicking on random parts of the scenery and just reading descriptions that add a bit of flavor. Usually it simply describes exactly what you're seeing, but sometimes, and I only found out later, that they could possibly be valuable plugs hidden in those places. Once again, my brain has been wired to identify things that are significant and most likely interactable, like a computer or a lever in an office, and ignore background stuff like shelving and boxes. So for the longest time, I was struggling for supplies because I wasn't actively hunting for these plugs. Fortunately, I figured this out roughly around the time things started to get really hairy. Lastly, let's touch on the puzzles. This was something I really enjoyed. They were a perfect balance between fun and challenging. A step above the usual grab the square emblem, insert in the square emblem slot type puzzles. Instead, it involved a bit of reading and a bit of logic. And not to mention, it felt more like problem solving rather than relying heavily on obscure riddles. If you watched my Silent Hill F video, you'd know that I didn't really enjoy those puzzles. But these puzzles, although they make no sense in a high-tech experimental facility, was really fun to solve. Anytime I'm forced to reach for a pen and pad gets me excited and makes me feel like a genius when I eventually solve these problems. Being such a huge fan of horror, and especially survival horror, and never having the opportunity to play these classics when they released, this has been an absolute treat to visit one of the survival horror greats. Another banger from Shinji Mikami, might I add. and maybe better than Resident Evil 1? I don't know, maybe not. One thing I will say is that I kind of found the sequence near the end of the game a bit dragged out and annoying. The whole reboot the generator thing, but that's a minor gripe. As for the whole remaster discussion, while I would love a remaster of this game, I'm not so sure they could pull it off in a way that's true to the original. For starters, I've yet to see a third-person dinosaur shooting game that looks remotely close to a level of quality I expect from a game like this. I have a feeling Capcom has experimented with the idea and are struggling to get the actual dinosaurs to a possible level of quality we come to expect. What I mean is, look at the hunters from the Resident Evil 3 remake. I don't ever remember it feeling quite right fighting them. It feels a bit clunky for lack of a better term. Or those sewer monsters from the Resident Evil 2 remake, I forget what they're called. These monsters don't particularly feel good to fight. And these are the closest things we get to see in what might be a dinosaur in a Resident Evil game. My suggestion, and this is a very long shot, is if they keep the fixed camera angle and remaster it that way. Similar to how Resi 1 plays, or even Tormented Souls. Both great examples of how the fixed camera style can still be enjoyable in modern times. But yeah, that's it from me. I love this game and I can't wait to get into part 2. Or maybe Silent Hill 2. You know what? Let me know in the comments what you think. Would you like to see Dino Crisis 2 or Silent Hill 2 next? That's it for this one. I want to thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.